Hello and welcome in to another episode of the Fantasy Football Forecast. I'm your host, Trevor Scott. Doing a solo episode today. Matt is out of town, so I'll be doing a couple this week for you guys. And since a big portion of the leagues that I'm sure are listening had their trade deadline pass this past week, we're not going to be doing a trade target video this week. Instead, we're going to look back at the top 20 players for the rest of the season and how it could have played out by doing a 2-round mock draft. I don't know if this is a big requirement in the industry, or if there's a lot of demand for this, or if people want to hear this, but I do think trying to get some of these guys, if your deadline hasn't passed, is a good idea in case you don't necessarily think you can, or didn't necessarily think some of these players would be up there for anybody. So I'm going to go through my guys' top 20, kind of try and mock it too, so it would make sense for the teams. And without further ado, let's get into the 2-round mock. So we're going to do it on Sleeper, looking at the board. The first overall pick, I don't think it should be that much of a surprise, is going to be Lamar Jackson. He has been phenomenal. Obviously throwing a lot of touchdowns, on pace for well over 4,000 yards. We'll see if he stays on that pace. Could maybe push 41, 42, but he's currently on pace for 4,500 yards. Lots of passing touchdowns, obviously. He hasn't been running a ton over the second half of the year, but that hasn't mattered because he scored so frequently. So I think in Superflex, he's pretty clearly the top pick. Going into number 2, we just saw, even in a tough matchup, Ja'Marr Chase scored 2 touchdowns against the Chargers. He's gone off multiple weeks against Baltimore. They have a solid schedule rest of season. They're going to have to be scoring because their defense is so bad. So he's going to continue to rack up points. And I definitely think over the rest of the year, him and Burrow are going to be very valuable together. The third player I'm going to go with here is Justin Jefferson. We have seen him be very successful with Sam Darnold, and in a way where he fell in the preseason because everybody was worried about it. So, it was like some people had Chase, Amon-Ra, even A.J. Brown was maybe in that conversation around Jefferson, but then he's come out and he's looked great. Darnold has thrown a lot of touchdowns. Darnold hasn't been necessarily as good of late, but I still think Jefferson has shown throughout the first half of the year that he's right back to the player that he always was. So I do think that is a very good pick at third overall. And our strategy is always to lean heavier into the wide receivers because of a 3 wide receiver format. So that's why he'll show up maybe above some of the quarterbacks that we're going to talk about later. The fourth pick is the best running back in the league currently, and that is Saquon Barkley. He has been very good in his explosion games, right? I mean, he has had the highest level of high upside, 200 scrimmage yards, multiple scores in different games. He's had some duds, so I don't want to say like he's been extremely consistent throughout in a way that maybe Bijan Robinson has over the last 5 weeks, where he's been consistently really high producer. But we just saw Bijan had a stinker. So, it's not like everybody's immune from that. And I do think Saquon presents the highest upside running behind that excellent offensive line and on the best team he's ever been a part of. And I don't think anybody would be scoffing at having Barkley on their teams. Number 5, just mentioned him, same offense, quarterback Jalen Hurts. He has shown that he can maintain rushing success. He scored a lot of rushing touchdowns, and I know he went through a little bit of a funk earlier in the year, but that was because A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith were out. Dallas Goedert has been in and out of the lineup with injuries himself. Now I think moving forward, all of those guys look like they're healthy. The offense looks like it's rolling. Saquon has been decently involved in the passing game, and there have been some games where Saquon goes off and Hurts maybe doesn't score so much. Kind of like this past week where Hurts only had 20 points, but from a high-end quarterback, it's hard to beat Hurts. And I really think that having a quarterback in a Superflex league has been super important. And if you have 2 of these guys, that almost feels like it's going to kind of ride you to a fantasy title here, or propel you into the playoffs in a way that maybe if you didn't have the elite quarterbacks, you wouldn't have been able to. So I do like Hurts here at 5 overall. Getting into number 6, it's another running back. It's Bijan Robinson. This is about where he was going anyways. If you're listening to the channel, we had him pushed down a little bit because we like to push the receivers up. Again, it's a roster build thing. But, some of the receivers are in pretty bad shape now. I mean, like CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill were both up here. Those are kind of consensus 1-2, and they're really not playing that well, or really aren't nearly as valuable as they were at the beginning of the year. So, Bijan continuing to produce at a high level really pushes him up here. Going into number 7, this is going to be an interesting call because we're going to watch him tonight. I'm recording this on Monday, right before the Monday night game. But I think it's pretty safe to say for the rest of the season that Nico Collins is going to be a stud. He was unbelievable to start the year. The hamstring injury kind of derailed him, but he has been cleared. He was cleared last week, and then he's full go. 100% was the report here. So I don't expect to have any letdowns here with Nico Collins the rest of the season. I think he is in position to have a monster second half. The Houston offense has not been even close to the same without him. I think they really are going to lean into his usage. I hope to see over 150 air yards. Maybe he gets up into the 120-yard range, maybe scores in this game against Dallas tonight. But I do think Nico, wide receiver 3 here, moving forward for the rest of the year. Getting into the next player, we're going to go with the quarterback, Josh Allen. He has kind of been good, but not really necessarily as good as we were hoping for, like as top end as we were hoping for. He did just have a great game against Kansas City. He had that last drive where he had like 35 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown all in that last drive. So he really pushed his ceiling up there in a big way. And I do think that over the rest of the season, Josh Allen, he's still a stud. He's still awesome on the ground. He's still a great passer. Amari Cooper, played a little bit more in this game. He's been hurt, but I think Cooper is going to be much more involved in moving down the stretch, open up the offense, and I think Allen is going to benefit from that in a huge way. I think there's going to be a lot more passing scores in this offense to be had, and I think Allen is a great pick here as a redraft in the first round. Going over to 9, some people are probably wondering that are listening, when are you going to put McCaffrey on the board? And I'm going to do that here. So I do think rest of the season, McCaffrey has the opportunity to be really good. He kind of got his feet under him these last 2 weeks. He didn't have a ton of work in that first game on the ground, 13 carries. But then we saw 19 carries this past game. No touchdowns yet. That's going to change. The 49ers offense, I think, is going to look better from the rushing game perspective moving forward. And I think McCaffrey obviously is going to be the main reason for that. And so, he's going to start scoring. He's going to start playing an increased role in the passing game. I know he had 6 for 68 in the first game back, but he really didn't do much in the second week back in the passing game. I expect that to change. And so, here's a guy that if you can still get him, before the end of the season, before your trade deadline passes, you should be making a big offer to try and get him. Because if he had gone for like 22 and 25, there's no way that you'd be able to get him. But since he's had 2 kind of mediocre games to start, I think there may still be a buying window here for Christian McCaffrey. Going into number 10 and rounding out the first round, we're going to go with another quarterback here, Joe Burrow. He has been unbelievable. The defense has been terrible, which means that they're having to throw constantly to try and stay in games. And so I do expect more of the same over the rest of the season. The game script, I think, is going to be awesome for his fantasy production. He's throwing a lot of touchdowns. T. Higgins is back healthy now, who missed 3 games. So I think that only helps open up their offense. I know he's going into a bye week, but hopefully for the purpose of this, you understand what we're trying to do and kind of more of a overall ranking than anything else. So Burrow rounds out the first round here. And I think pairing Burrow with a wide receiver, how we on this channel love to take wide receivers a lot. And I think coming off a massive game, finally had a breakout game, was Amon-Ra St. this last week. He had 11 for 161 and 2 touchdowns. And, he's kind of hung around a little bit. He's been a disappointment, I think, overall in the season, but his touchdown production has been consistent. So his floor has been very high, which is kind of why you draft him, right? And then he just had this monster game. So maybe that's signs of things to come. I think it was more the matchup against Jacksonville. They're just horrible against receivers. And Amon-Ra was just kind of running wide open on both his touchdowns. And so, I don't know how predictive this is over the rest of the season. Detroit does have a pretty tough schedule down the stretch, and they do play outdoors twice in the fantasy playoffs. So I think there's a little bit of reservation here with Amon-Ra St. but I do still think elite level production is hard to come by at the wide receiver position, especially right now with all the injuries at the position and all the quarterback injuries to the top level players. So I'm going to go with Amon-Ra as my wide receiver 4 there to kick off the second round. The next player we're going to talk about here at 202 is Kyler Murray. So I really think that Kyler has kind of shown out over these last couple of weeks that the passing ability has kind of come around on the season. He was very erratic early in the year, and it was like he had a couple of games where he threw for 145 yards type of thing. And so I was really concerned about Kyler. I was recommending him as a sell. Like if somebody's going to buy this high-end production that he's getting on the ground, with this kind of low level or inconsistent passing play, try and sell him. But at this point, I think he's kind of put those concerns to bed. So I do think the rushing is nice. He did have 2 rushing touchdowns this last week. So I don't think that's necessarily something that you can count on all the time. But I do think that Kyler overall, very good quarterback to have in fantasy. And, in Superflex, that is just super, super difficult to lock in. So getting him here at the top of the second round, I think, is where I would be willing to go back in on Kyler, knowing what I know now about how this season has shaken out. The next guy we're going to talk about here, another guy that people are probably like, where is Derrick Henry? How have you gone so long without putting Derrick Henry on here? But we're going to do that now. So I'm going to put Derrick Henry in here as the 2-3. Obviously, he's been awesome, right? He scored in every game. He's just a touchdown machine. He's a monster on the ground. Hasn't had a ton of passing game work, which is expected, but I think that's even been less than we thought overall. So I think when they get into pass-heavy game scripts, it's really hard for him to have these monster weeks. But then when they're up, he is just unbelievably good. So obviously he was getting picked in Superflex, around the 3-4 turn. So this is still a massive jump up in value. I just think, as you're setting up your team, some of these other guys have better passing game roles at running back. All 3 of the guys that went ahead of him, plus the receivers, plus it's really difficult to get a quarterback. If you don't get one early, it's kind of a little bit tough to find one. So that's why I have Henry pushed down a little bit here. It's not even like I pushed him way down, but I do think that there are some people that would see this and be like, no way you would get Derrick Henry in a redraft, or no way he's, the 13th overall player rest of the season. He is much better than that. And I wouldn't blame me for saying that because he has been phenomenal. Moving on to 2-4, we are going to go back to the quarterback position and take Brock Purdy. He has just been awesome all year. He lost Brandon Ayuk, and Jennings has been able to step in, and they clearly have a very, very good connection. So, the passing game hasn't really missed a beat there. I know Kittle has been banged up. Debo's been banged up. Ayuk obviously out. McCaffrey didn't come back until this last week, and Purdy still just keeps on keeping on, right? I mean, he is still just awesome, still ranked in the top 10, 5 quarterbacks routinely. He is very good on the whole season so far as well, right? You see QB 8 on the season. He had some down weeks in here, if you can see this. But I think over the rest of the season, he should be in for a huge finish, including Rams, Miami, Detroit in the playoffs. I think he is going to have a strong finish and is somebody that you very much want on your team if we were redrafting to try and get you home to the playoffs here in a Superflex league. The next guy up, who I think also is another quarterback, and people are probably like, dude, where is Jayden Daniels, man? This is Superflex. Like, he's got to be a first-round pick. But I do think we've seen a couple cracks in the armor over the last couple weeks with him not connecting as much with McLaurin. He had the weird game where he barely even looked to him in the first half. They went up against some contenders, and he just didn't look as good. I think he still might be contending with that rib injury a little bit as well. That has me concerned. But I will say that Daniels has a very good schedule over the rest of the year. If we take a look at that, right? I mean, a lot of teams that he should be able to take advantage of here. Dallas, Tennessee, not so much, and then a bye. But then New Orleans, Philly, Atlanta, Dallas, he could be in for a really strong fantasy finish here. And I do think overall, right, middle of the second round, still a very high draft pick, still well above where we were drafting him in the pre-draft process. But pushing him up any further, I think, isn't something I would necessarily have done. But I do think there was a chance that, if we're drafting with other people, that if somebody in your league would have been in on Daniels, like, oh, this rookie, very exciting prospect type of thing. So still have him up here in the second round, but not necessarily as enthusiastic as I would have been 2 or 3 weeks ago. Going to 2-6. So this team already has a quarterback, right? So we're going to look to another position. And, Breece Hall just coming off a good game here, finally flashed that 30-point upside after having 3 straight bad weeks. We've been telling you, buy Breece Hall if you have the chance. Buy him if anybody is selling on this dip. And he has one of the best running back schedules over the rest of the year. He's going to get work in the passing game. I don't think Braylon Allen is necessarily going to take enough work from him to matter. And so I think Breece Hall overall is going to be a very valuable asset rest of the season. And, pushing up McCaffrey ahead of him and Derrick Henry ahead of him is a little bit tough, kind of pushes him down in Superflex mock. But I do think I wouldn't fault you at all for taking him in the first round or above any of these running backs, really, because his rest of the season schedule and his rest of the season outlook is just that good. So overall, really like Breece Hall. Not a shock to anybody that's listening, but I do think, there was some concern there over the last month. His rushing really hasn't been that good until this last week. So I think kind of spelled some of those concerns. The next guy we're going to put on here is a wide receiver. Team 4 is not going to get a quarterback through the first 2 rounds, so that's going to be something they'd have to address, right? This would be a team, my team or a Matt team coming out of this draft, because we like to wait on quarterback. But overall, AJ Brown started the year off with an unfortunate injury, missed almost a month, but then came back. He's been awesome, over 100 yards very consistently. Always a threat to score a deep touchdown. The offense overall looks great. Jalen Hurts has been looking good. Saquon Barkley opening up the offense, with how good he's been on the ground. And so I think A.J. Brown wheels up for the rest of the season. He is going to be a top 5 wide receiver. And I think, again, if your goal was to get a receiver earlier than this, around the turn, I wouldn't have any problem picking A.J. Brown higher than this. Going to team 3. We got another quarterback coming off the board, and I think this might surprise some people, but I'm going to scroll all the way down to Baker Mayfield. So he has been undeniable this year. I mean, he, regardless of the weapons, regardless of what's going on around him, he has just continued to be phenomenal at the quarterback position. It's hard to believe that I'm putting him this low even, right? I mean, you look at his player card, he is quarterback 5 on the year. He's coming off a bad game against San Francisco when he didn't really have his weapons. Even against Kansas City, still put up 18 points, right? But then look at the rest of the season schedule. The Giants, Carolina, Raiders. Chargers, not so good, but then Dallas and Carolina again. He is going to push right back up into that top 3, I think even maybe top 2, right behind Lamar Jackson in total points. And I think that is just incredible from somebody we were drafting outside of the top 9 rounds. So, overall, Baker in a redraft, especially for rest of season redraft, he is absolutely a top 2 round pick. He is absolutely a top 10 quarterback. And anybody that doesn't think that, if anybody in your league has him and doesn't think that, and you can still buy him for less than that, go and get Baker Mayfield, because he is going to be a league winner down the stretch. Coming up on these last 2 guys here, another guy that just didn't quite fit in before this is Jahmyr Gibbs. I still love Gibbs as a player. Obviously, David Montgomery has been taking a ton of work, but that hasn't really impacted Jahmyr Gibbs. They just played Jacksonville, and Gibbs barely played and still put up 19 fantasy points. He still had like 120 total yards and a touchdown. He's just so explosive. He's so good with the ball in his hands, and they know exactly how to use him. They put him in great spots. They get him 15 touches a game, and he is just a very high-level performer. So I don't think the matchups matter with Gibbs at all. I think he's a very, very strong RB1 for the rest of the season. And again, it's one of these guys that the talent is so good, I wouldn't even care if you take him all the way in the first round either. He has been so good. And I think that role and that explosion is going to continue over the rest of the season. He's an extremely exciting player. And the last guy that we're going to talk about here is a wide receiver. We're going to get a 6th wide receiver in here, and that is Garrett Wilson. He had a down game. I get it. He's been a little bit frustrating, but the volume has been really good. The touchdowns have been good. He was a top 5 wide receiver as recently as a couple weeks ago, and obviously that's changed over the last couple weeks here, because he had a 1-point game and a 9-point game here. Just not great over these last 2 weeks after having that ridiculous touchdown catch in the back of the end zone. But I do think after the bye, right, Seattle, Miami, Jacksonville, Rams, Buffalo, that is an awesome schedule rest of the season. We mentioned it with Breece Hall, bring it up here again with Garrett Wilson. And I just think it's really hard to ignore that. He's still wide receiver 8 on the season for however you have felt about him. If you feel disappointed, if you have him, he is still wide receiver 8. Like, it's still hard to even deny how good he has been this year. Really high target share, a lot of targets. And I think coming out of the bye that he's going to be even more featured in the offense. Hopefully Aaron Rodgers looks better, and Garrett Wilson can continue to give you that high-level wide receiver 1 production that you had been getting before the last couple weeks. So look out for him to be very productive over the rest of the season. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching. That's our top 20 or 2-round mock at this point in the year. Again, I'm not sure how this content plays out. I really hope you guys like this. Maybe we'll take a look at like ranking set or something going into the fantasy playoffs, maybe like rank out everybody for that part of the year. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you're still here, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye.